Now let's get started. Today's presenter in this latest Advanced Analytics for Data Scientists, all about Tableau Set Actions, is Tableau Ambassador Keith Helfrich. Keith is the Managing Director at Action Analytics and has been in the infrastructure, integration, data visualization, and analytics space for over 15 years. So you're in good hands. With that, I'm going to kick it over to you, Keith.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, so today we're going to talk about set actions, and I'm really excited about this and have a lot of gratitude. I'm grateful to Tableau for having me here, and I'm also grateful to the Zen Master of Zen Masters, Jonathan Drummey, who helped me to put together the sample data set that we're going to be using, and as well the champion of set actions, Bethany Lyons. Bethany helped me to assemble all of these use cases. So as usual, these things come together as a village, and it's one big Tableau community that's working on these things. So a lot of gratitude out to everybody who has helped me to get us to where we are today. So today we're going to talk about this fabulous new feature, Set Actions, that was released in Tableau version 2018.3. And Set Actions really unleash this big new world of visual analytics, and they bring together lots of new use cases, lots of new possibilities. They open up entirely new realms of visual analytic capabilities with Tableau. But the reason why that they make this happen, the core of it, is that Tableau Set Actions allow us as authors to very tightly couple together the interactivity of our users with the computational visual analysis that we as authors compose. And it's that very tight coupling of the interactivity with the computation that is the key to set actions and the world of possibility that they open up for us. So the way that this happens is through curiosity and engagement. It's curiosity and engagement that are really going to drive our audience to interact with the dashboard. And interactivity itself is just one of the main core fundamental components of rich data analytics. The interactivity of our users really helps them to dive deeper into the data, and it helps the data to dive deeper into the user's brain and understanding. One of the ways that I like to think about it, we all know the visual analytics is so powerful because our eyes and our visual sense is this high bandwidth cable into our brain and into our understanding. Now, with this increased capacity of interactivity, we're adding to the visual component, which is already very powerful, a somatic experience where the user is touching and clicking and interacting with the data. And so when we cable up that virtuous cycle of their actions with their own two hands and their own fingers, combined with the visual response of the system, not only are they engaged and curious to dive deeper into the data, but what they see dives deeper into their brain at a very fundamental level, and this is important. So we're going to talk about set actions today, and there's really two parts to set actions. There's the set part, and then there's the action part. So before we get into some use cases, I'm going to break down and just kind of describe a little bit about each. If you're not familiar with sets have been around for a long time, and they simply partition up the domain of a given dimension into two pieces. You're either in the set because you qualify and you meet some criteria that's defined by the author, or you're not because you don't meet the criteria, and in that case, you're out. So you're either in or you're out. For example, if you've been using Tableau for more than 6 months, then you qualify, you meet that criteria, you're in the I've been using Tableau for more than 6 months set. If you drink coffee, then you qualify, you meet that criteria, you can be in the coffee drinkers set. And if you're not, then you're out of the set. And at the fundamental level, this is how sets behave. They've been around for a long time. And they, for a long time, have been really one of my favorite features to use, although perhaps underutilized by others. And the reason that I like them so much is that you can use sets virtually anywhere in Tableau. You can use them to filter calculations. You can use them to size and to color. You can use them in Booleans, and you can use them virtually everywhere. And now the power of these things comes into play when we can transition the control over who is in and who is out of the set over to our audience as they interact with the dashboard. So as a preface into the actions piece, I thought it might first be helpful to illustrate what's the difference between a regular filter and a set. They both use a criteria to determine who qualifies and who doesn't. But the key difference is that with a filter, only the values that meet the criteria remain in the view. And anything that doesn't meet the criteria of the filter is just excluded from the view, and those records just no longer exist in my universe as a Tableau author, and I can't work with them. I can't build table calculations on them. I can't leave them kind of faded off in the background so that my users can see them just for context and for reference. They're just gone. Whereas with a set, all of the records remain available to me in the view to work with, and now I can use that set to drive the inquiry with the relationships between the members who are in the set and between the members who are not in the set. And so I can use those sets in the view. I can use the set from one dimension inside of the set for another dimension, which is really powerful. I'm going to show you some examples of that today. I can use the set inside of a calculation. And so this really ability to determine who's in and who's out and use that in or out all throughout Tableau allows me to focus the nature of my visual analytics on the relationships between the data. And so now, if we get into the action part of set actions, prior to version 2018.3, there were three main dashboard actions that were available to us: filters, highlights, and URL actions. And the thing that each of those three traditional actions have in common is they each just do one thing. A filter action filters, a highlight action highlights, and a URL action takes me to a URL. But now, with the advent of set actions that I can drive the members of a set, the key difference is that I, as the author, design the behavior of what happens next. And as I've described already, I can use that set in a wide variety of ways, and there are just tons and tons of things that I can do with it. And this really is one of the main reasons why set actions open up such a big new world of visual analytics possibility. So just to kind of walk through a hypothetical example, if I'm building a dashboard, I'll often have, say, multiple worksheets, multiple visualizations coming together in one dashboard. I've got, say, sheet A, sheet B, and sheet C, and each of those worksheets in the dashboard can make use of the same set. I might, for example, in one of them use it to color the viz. In another sheet, I might use the set to hide some data. And in a third sheet, I might use that set to filter an axis. And the key thing here is that any of the worksheets in the dashboard can update the members of the set, and all of the worksheets in the dashboard that make use of the set will react and respond in the way that they have been defined to do so by myself as the Tableau author. And so now, with that kind of general overview, let's take a look at the wide variety of things that are possible to do with these sets, and now whose possibility we can place into the hands of our users thanks to the advent of set actions. So I can use these sets really in a wide variety of circumstances, as I've mentioned. I can use the set inside of a visualization. I can use the set inside of another set, which is really powerful. I'm looking forward to showing you that. And I can use the set inside of a calculation. And then inside of each of those three broad categories, there are then another wide variety of things that I can able to do. So for example, using the set in the viz, I can use the selected members of the set to color my selection. I can use those selected members to change the shape or the size of the marks. I can use those selected set members to sort the selection in a computational sort. I can use them to group the selection in a technique that is called proportional brushing. Or I can use them to compute, say, for example, a percent of total. Using the set from one dimension inside of the set for another dimension, I can use that selection from the user to filter or to group on a field that's related to the field that they've interacted with. Or if I use the set in a calculation, I can filter by a measure in the selection. I can use the set as some kind of condition. And I have open to me all of the wide possibilities, virtually limitless possibilities of the ways that I can use Tableau's calculation dialog editor box to build my own calculations and use this set relationship to build my own world. And so with that introduction, these then are kind of the main concepts that I hope to go through today. And in my opinion, that's about enough of the slides. What I'd really love to do for the rest of our hour together is open up Tableau and dive in just roll our sleeves up and let's get into this stuff. So I'm going to spend the rest of the afternoon in Tableau Desktop, and what we're going to do is just take a walk through this sample data. This sample data is completely synthetic. It's totally fabricated at random, has no relationship to the real world, but it does parallel, say, a common business scenario that we might encounter. In this case, we are a company that designs home appliances, and we contract the manufacturing for these home appliances out to multiple contract vendors. And because it's a complex world, we have kind of a complex data set, a complex data model. I didn't want you to leave disappointed with the complexity of what we're working with today. So I've got 3 different data sources. My first data source is my manufacturing production data. And so we can see that I contract the manufacturing of these things out to 5 different vendors. Vendor A has 1 factory, and they produce 2 products, the stainless barbecue and the wall oven. And each of these products come in different models. There's an entry-level model, a basics, and a deluxe model, and then a pro model. And so vendor B, we can see, has 2 factories, and they produce a handful of products. And so just looking at the overall volume of production, one of the first things that I see is that vendor B is by far the highest volume producer, and vendor A also has some high volume products for some of the things, and vendor C makes a high volume of the entry-level stainless barbecues, etc. So that's my production data source. And then naturally, as a natural course of events occur in the world, some of those items that we manufacture and sell wind up coming back for service. They need to have some sort of service event because something has gone wrong with them. And so my second data source is my service data. And the service data contains many of the same dimensions as the production data, but it's also got some extra stuff like what was the failure mode, what went wrong, why did it come back for service, what channel was the service requested through, was it requested online or did they call into our 1-800 service number, was the item covered in warranty, etc. And so if I just look at this service data, the record counts look fairly similar. Vendor B is my highest volume producer, so it would make sense that they also have a high volume of repairs. The same for these high volume repairs coming back from vendor A. And so then the third data source, I can work with these 2 production and service data together, either by joining them or across a blend, in order to arrive at a ratio that helps me to identify the number of service items divided by the total volume that was produced. And when I normalize everything out and look at them in ratios, there's really only kind of a couple of circumstances where, say, the basic wall ovens from vendor A have a really high service rate, the same for the deluxe stainless barbecue. And so this ratio I can arrive at either by joining the 2 data sources together or working with them is the result of a data blend. And today, some of the use cases I'm going to show you are doing both. So that's just an orientation to the data and the scenario that will drive the rest of the use cases that we're looking at today. So from there, what I'd like to do is just begin with this basic scenario dashboard. This basic scenario dashboard, to me, is very useful, and it's driven completely off of set actions. Here on the left, I've got my overall manufacturing volume by vendor. In the top right, I'm breaking down that manufacturing volume, that production volume by product. And as I click on each of these vendors, I'm driving the action of the membership of a vendor set that then has each of these other views responding. So down here, as I click on vendor B, I can see the percent of total that vendor B contributes to my manufacturing volume and the percent of total that they contribute to my service events. And vendor B is obviously my preferred vendor. Not only are they producing most of my volume, they produce 60% of my volume, but only 46% of the service events are related to them. So they have a very tight control over their quality. And in fact, in this box and whiskers plot, where I'm only looking at the outliers on service rate, I can see that very few of these marks on this box and whiskers plot are outliers that are responsible for vendor B. In this upper corner, I'm looking at some proportional brushing where I'm grouping the products by the proportion that are manufactured by that vendor. And because my actions on this vendor sheet drive the membership of the vendor set, I can select as many of these vendors as I want. So if I select my 3 lowest volume producers, I can see that actually that's probably where most of my attention needs to go. They're not producing a very big volume, but they also don't have much control over their quality. They're producing 27% of the products, but are responsible for 41% of the service events, and most of the outliers in the service events are related from these bottom 3 vendors. So this then is kind of a basic scenario dashboard driven by set actions, and what I'd like to do is show you how do we go about building something like this from scratch. So what I'll do is I'll just kind of thumb over here to a starter dashboard, a starter workbook rather, that has all 3 of the same data sources in it, but none of the sets, none of the calculations, none of the actions, and we're just going to build that dashboard by hand. So I've got my 3 data sources here, and that first worksheet was my production volume by vendor, and from the production data source, I'm going to drag vendor out to the rows, production count onto the columns, and sort that guy descending, and fit him to the entire view. That's my breakdown by vendor. And now I'll do the same thing, production volume by product, to get that top right-hand sheet. And so in that one, it's very similar, except I've got product on the rows, so I'm breaking down by product. And then if I want to create a new dashboard and get these 2 guys working together, I can drag one out and the other out. But to get that proportional brushing in that product sheet, what I'm going to want to do is put a set that is built on the vendor dimension onto the color of this product sheet so that I can color by the in and out members of that vendor set. And so to set that up, I'm going to right-click on the vendor dimension and create a set. And creating that set on that vendor dimension, I'm just going to call this my vendor set. And when I'm defining the set, I can just kind of hand select a handful of members. It doesn't matter which ones I populate because they'll wind up being populated by the user when they interact with the dashboard. And so when I click on that set, I see down here with this Venn diagram icon, I have my new set, and I can simply just drag that in and out onto the color shelf. And the blue marks at the moment are sorted to the right, and I want them to sort to the left. So I'm just going to grab them there in the color legend and drag them down to sort them to the left. And so now my production volume by product view is proportionally brushed by the members of the vendor set. And so if I come back over here and look at my dashboard, I can see that that definitely is true. I'll set the dashboard size to automatic so it takes up a little bit more space. And now the next thing that I want to do is I just want to cable up the action part of the set actions that will drive the membership of that vendor set based on the interaction of the users with this breakdown by vendor worksheet. So to do that, I'll come up here to this dashboard menu and I'll choose to create a new dashboard action. And with this new dashboard action, here is where after version 2018.3, we see this brand new option available. In the past, we could only create filter, highlight, and URL actions, or we could jump to a sheet. But now with these newer versions of Tableau, I can create an action that will change the set values. And so what I want to do is I want to change the vendor set values on select when somebody selects that breakdown by vendor sheet. And one key thing to be aware of with sets is a set is valid for the entire data source. And so when I'm defining this action, Tableau is first asking me which data source do I want to drive the action in. And so I want to drive the action in my production data source, and I want to update the members of the vendor set. And because I'm going to be doing this multiple times in multiple data sources, I'm just going to help myself out and give this guy a name that helps me to keep it clear to say this is my vendor set action in the production data. Okay, so I'm going to click OK, create that set action, and voila, I'm done. The set action is updating the members of the vendor set, and when I click on vendor A, I can see the proportion of the 2 products that vendor A manufactures relative to all of the other manufacturing count produced by the other vendors. And here really is a great example of the way that sets differ from filters. Had this been a filter action, only the blue marks would remain, and all of the rest of the gray marks would not be available for me to make use of in table calculations or in coloring the viz or in working with in any way. And so this really is how set actions allow us to let relationships drive the view. Okay, so to build out the rest of this dashboard, I'm going to build that pie chart at the bottom, which is my percent of total production. And that guy is also on the production data. I want a pie chart, so I'm going to change the mark type to a pie. I'm going to put that vendor set onto the color, and I'm going to take my production count and drop it onto the angle. Here on my Mac, I want to label these things, so I'm just going to hold down the Command key to drag a copy of that sum of the production count onto the label to label those two things. Fit this guy to the entire view so that it's a little bit easier to see. And then on the pill that's on the label, I'm going to format him to change the number format to a percentage with 0 decimal points. And then on that pill, create a quick table calculation that's a percent of total. And that gives me my percent of total. And so now, having built that percent of total production off of the production data, I can just come and drag that worksheet into my dashboard. And remember that a set is valid for the entire data source. And since each of these worksheets in this dashboard are all at this point running off of that production data source, that blue pie chart down at the bottom is just automatically cabled up because it has the members of the vendor set on the color, and that vendor set membership is being driven by the dashboard action that I had created earlier. Okay, and so now, because life is complex and oftentimes we have to deal with multiple data sources, let's begin to look at our percent of total service events. And so for that, I'm going to go to my second data source, the service data, and the steps are going to be pretty much the same. I'm going to want a pie chart, so I'm going to change the mark type to a pie, and I want to put the vendor set on the color, but this is a new data source, and the vendor set doesn't exist yet in this data source, so I'm going to have to create a new set in this data source because the set is specific to one data source at a time. So I'm going to right-click on that vendor dimension, choose to create a new set. That's my vendor set. Some terminology that you might like to use, just the semantics, if it helps you to kind of understand things better, is I might call that my selected vendor set, because this is the set that my users are going to drive the membership of when they select the marks on the screen, something like that. So you can call these things anything that you want to, whatever makes sense to you. And again, I'll just pre-populate it with a couple of members. And now that I have that vendor set in my service data, I'm going to drop it onto the color. These are service events, so I'm going to change the color of those end marks to red because they're service events. And then I'm going to take the number of service events again and put it on the angle. I'll drag a copy of that thing and put it onto the label. I'll create my quick table calculation to get a percent of total, and then I'll right-click on that guy to format and just get rid of the decimal points after the percentage mark. Fit that thing to the entire screen so that it's easy to see, and now I've got that percent of total service events, and if I come back to my dashboard, I can drag that guy out here, and now my dashboard is kind of coming together pretty nicely. And so next, my aim is that when I click on these vendors here to drive the membership of the vendor action set, what I really want is for that red pie chart to be responding and reacting to my interactivity in the same way that the blue marks are responding. And so in order to accomplish that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up to create a new dashboard action because I need to drive the membership of the set in that new data source. And I'm going to create another action to drive the membership of the set in the service data. And I'm going to say I want to change the set values, and this is going to be my vendor set in the service data. And I want for that thing to happen on select when somebody chooses one of the vendors from this production breakdown by vendor thing. And I want to drive now the membership of the selected vendor set in the service data source. And so when I try to do that, I'm going to create this new dashboard action. I get a warning here, and it's telling me that fields on this originating worksheet are missing. And what that's telling me is I'm trying to drive the set membership of the vendor set in the service data, but this worksheet doesn't have the vendor dimension from the service data in the level of detail. And so when I click OK here and I create that new set action, even though the set action exists, that red pie mark still is not responding. And the reason is because this original data source here, it's got the vendor dimension from the production data in the level of detail of the view. Each one of these marks represents the vendor from the production data, but in order to pass the vendor from the service data into the service data set, I need to bring the vendor from the service data onto the detail of this view so that now each one of these marks represents the vendor from both data sources. And I can pass the vendor from one data source to the set in that data source, and I can pass the vendor from the service data source to the set in that data source. And we see that those two things are brought together thanks to data blending. Tableau has automatically turned on the linking dimension for this blend, and this vendor dimension from the secondary service data source is now available in my dashboard to be sent as a set action to drive that set in that secondary data source. And so I really hope that this example is useful to you because I wanted to really kind of illustrate how in your complex environments, when you have more than one data source, how these things can come together in practice. Okay, and so then for our last one, what we wanted to do was we wanted to look at the service rate outliers. And for that, we're going to build the box and whiskers plot. I'm going to build that service rate calculation across the data blend because we've been working with the data blend. So we wanted a box and whiskers plot by product. So I'm going to drag my products out to the columns. And I'm going to create then my calculated field for my service rate. And that is going to be the sum of my number of service events divided by the sum from the production data of the production count. And so that's going to give me this ratio of service events to total production volume. And so now that I've got that service rate calculation, I'm going to want to set on it the default properties so that it is always treated as a percentage because it's a ratio. And I'm going to drag that service rate calculation out onto the rows. Tableau has by default given me a bar as the mark type, so I'm going to change that mark type to a circle. And I get one mark for every product because my view is currently at the product level of detail. But what I want to do is I want to break this thing down and look at a deeper level of granularity so I can drag other dimensions into the view. I can drag model out into the view. I can drag vendor out into the view. I can drag the discrete week of production out into the view. And each time I drag these new dimensions out into the view, the viz level of detail is getting deeper and deeper. And notice how Tableau across the blend is automatically linking those dimensions so that my ratio will be performed at the correct level of detail. It's automatically linking the dimensions that are in the view. So now that I've really drilled down into a deeper level of detail, if we look down here in the bottom left, I can see that my viz has 4,531 marks in it. But by visual inspection, it really only looks like it's got about 100. And that's because they're all just kind of stacked up on top of each other. And so even if I kind of change the size, like it's really hard to see those things. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take advantage of a technique that's called jittering. And I'm just going to grab this pseudo-random number for jittering calculation, and I'm going to drop that in. And the place that I got that from is from Jeffrey Schaefer's data science blog. There's another community Tableau post out there on the Tableau community where it originated. But just to show it to you, I love Jeffrey's blog overall, and this is his blog post where he looks at methods for jittering, and I'm using the pseudo-random number method. So I'm just going to grab that calculation into my clipboard and double-click in here in order to paste that guy in. And that, as a table calculation, what I want to do then is edit that table calculation to have it create a pseudo-random number for every mark in the view by computing across all of the dimensions in the view. And once I've done that, now my x-axis has this axis out here that's just kind of fanned those marks that used to be placed and stacked all on top of each other where I couldn't see them. It's fanned them out horizontally. And that axis is really kind of meaningless for me. I don't need to see it, so I'm going to unclick the show header so we don't see that axis. And I'll also kind of come in here and format the lines in order to get rid of the grid lines and get rid of the zero lines so that my box and whiskers plot looks clean. And to get the box and whiskers is super easy because Tableau has made some incredibly difficult things very easy to do. I'll just click on the analytics pane here and drag a box plot out onto the service rate. And when I drag a box plot out onto the service rate, I see it down there now. And the way that that is implemented is as a reference line. So if I right-click on this axis and choose to edit the reference line, I can just click this little checkbox here that says hide the underlying marks except for the outliers. And when I click that box, it's just going to hide everything that's inside of the whiskers of the box and whiskers plot to reduce that visual noise and leave me with just the things that I'm interested in, which are the outliers. And now, really, I'm almost there. So what I want to do then is begin to shape and color these marks by that selected vendor set. So I'm going to change the mark type to a shape and drag that in and out membership onto the color and another copy of that in and out membership onto the shape. And I can click in here to edit the shape and make the in members a red X because those are bad, and the out members a gray circle. And so just kind of readjusting my size up here so that those things are a little bit easier to see. That then is my service orders outliers. And if I just come in and drag that last worksheet here into the view, hide those legends because I don't need them, we can see that just in an instant, because the membership of the set in both of those data sources is cabled up to these dashboard actions, I'm really able to, in a very short amount of time, build this very useful dashboard. Here again, we see that each of these bottom three vendors are responsible for most of my problems in service quality and manufacturing quality, items that come back for service. But even though this dashboard is built using only set actions, which shows the power of set actions by themselves, I also wanted to highlight the ability to combine set actions with traditional highlight actions and traditional filter actions. So what if, for these bottom three vendors, I wanted to drill down product by product to see how they do? Well, that's super easy. I'll just come up here and create a new dashboard action that this time is a filter action. So I'm going to create one more action to filter, and I want that filter to happen on select when somebody selects a product from that production breakdown by product, and I want that thing to filter each of these three bottom right sheets, the 2% of totals and the outlier sheet based on the product that they choose. And so that then is my product filter. And when I click OK on that product filter, I can take this, which was already a valuable insight, and drill down even further by interacting with the view and see product by product how that situation changes. So for example, the refrigerators, it's bad, but it's not nearly as bad. They're producing 6% of the volume, 8% of the service events, whereas with the barbecues, the ratio is 43 to 57. That's a lot worse, right? And so again, because these actions are dynamic, I can select multiple of these things and look at them multiple at a time or just one at a time. And I just wanted to highlight the combination of the set action with a filter action, and we could also add in additional highlights as well. Okay, so wow, like, is that cool or what? I mean, I just think that is like super awesome. And what I wanted to do now is just kind of come back to this screen, this slide that was showing us the different use cases, and just take a checkpoint to see where we are. We have done almost everything inside of this use the set in a viz. We colored by the selection, we shaped by the selection, we didn't sort, I'm going to do that next. We grouped by the selection, which is proportional brushing, and we computed a percent as total. And so now, with about 25 minutes left in the webinar, what I'd like to do is do the computed sort, and then I'll show you some other advanced stuff that comes down from these other use cases as well. So I'm just going to reshare my screen here, and we'll jump back to our couple of Tableau workbooks here. this Tableau workbook, which is the main one, I'm going to show you first how, what the use case is, and then I'll show you how to build it. So in this one, I've got to break down a tree map by product that shows the total production volume for each of my products. And then this stacked bar chart down at the bottom gives me one new row for every factory, and those factories are broken down by the product. And what I want to be able to do is when I click on a selected product, I want to sort the factories that produce that product in the bars, and I want to sort the colors of that product over to the left so that I can make this visual comparison. So in other words, I want to sort both the rows and the colors so that when I click on this yellow front load washer here, the factories that make that front load washer are sorted to the top of the factory list, and that yellow mark is sorted to the left, so I get my common baseline and I can visually compare. And when I click on the wall oven here, the 3 factories that produce wall ovens are sorted here to the top. And so that's the aim of what we want to do. Let's jump over now back to our starter workbook and see how would we do that. So this guy is built just off of the production data source by itself. In that kind of sort by sheet, I have product on the color and the production count on the size. Tableau is fabulous. It just creates a tree map for me automatically. Again, I'm going to hold down the Command key on my Mac to drag a copy of both of those dimensions onto the label so that I can label those 2 things and then fit that in dashboard to the entire view. And that's kind of my main kind of menu sort by sheet. And then I want like a computed sort by select here. And that guy was a breakdown by factory with the production count on the columns. And just to get us started, I'm going to sort this thing the old-fashioned way, descending by the overall volume. And then product here was on the color. And again, I'll fit that guy to the entire view and come here to make the computed sort dashboard. And to make that computed sort dashboard, I'll just drag my 2 worksheets out here into the view. And I don't need that color legend because my main menu is the color legend. And so the goal then is to cable this thing up so that when I click on a product, that sorting happens on that factory sheet down below. And so what I want to do is I want to drive the membership of a product set or a set that I create on the product dimension. So I'll just kind of come back over here, right-click on my product dimension and choose to create a new set on the product dimension. And this guy is going to be my product set. I can pre-populate that with just 1 or 2 of the things. Eventually, the membership is going to be chosen by the user. And now that I have that product set, what I want to do is build the computed sort, or I want to build a calculation that is going to isolate the members of the product set and then compute the sort only on those members. So I'm going to create a calculated field here. Let's just call that my computed sort. And I'm going to say, if you're in the product set, then give me the production count end. And so these sets in Tableau are treated as a Boolean data type. And so they're treated just like a true or a false, which means that I can use them with this syntax, which says, if it's true that you're in the set, then give me the production count. And what's kind of implied here, I don't have to do this, but it's just implied, Tableau does it automatically, is an else null. So in other words, I'm using this calculation to identify the production count only from the members of the product set. And so that computed sort calculation, now that it's built, I can just come up here on my factory dimension and choose to sort by a field. And I want to sort descended by that computed sort calculation that I created. And that then is automatically going to sort the factories to the top. And now I want to do the same thing on the color. I'm just going to right-click on the color and sort the product dimension on the color, again, by that computed sort field that I created. And now the color of the elegant refrigerator, which is the member of the set, has sorted to the left. So the factory sorted to the top on that computed sort calculation, and the color sorted to the left on that computed sort calculation. And then the last thing that I want to do is just, that's the set part. Now it's time for the action part. In my dashboard, I just want to cable up that action so that when the user interacts with the marks on the screen, the viz will respond. So to do that, just like we did before, I'm going to come up to the dashboard menu, dashboard actions, and I'm going to create a new set action. So my action is going to be to change the set values of the product set in the production data, and I want that to happen when somebody chooses the product from that top sort by worksheet. And so now that that set action is created, the interactivity is there, and my users can click on one product at a time and do that computed sort, which is like just super fancy and also super easy, right? So those then are the last of the two scenarios that I'm going to build out by hand, only because we've only got about 20 minutes remaining and I want to get through the rest of these. So the rest of these use cases, all very powerful, are each built off of the same data sources with the same kind of business scenario, but I'm just going to kind of unpack them as they've already been built in my regular Tableau workbook. So we're going to go through next filtering on relationships between a related field, and then at the end we'll look at some extra things we can do by using the sets inside of a calculation. So just share my screen here one more time, come back over here to our main Tableau dashboard, and this stuff is really groovy. So in this view, I'm looking at that service rate over time by my vendors, by each model of the product, and the product is on the color. And up until set actions, the way that I had in a view like this available to me to kind of look at one product at a time would be to say highlight that product by selecting it in the color legend. And so when I click on this wall oven legend in the color, what it does is it highlights all of the wall ovens in the view. But this isn't really so great for me because not every vendor makes every product. And so vendor C and vendor E, they don't even make wall ovens. And those rows are still in the view, cluttering my visual analysis and fogging my cognition with non-data ink that I'm not interested in is just really a problem for me. And so it's just not that great to click through these things and highlight. Instead, wouldn't it be nice if I could just click on the wall oven mark and filter down to only the vendors that make wall ovens? Or if I could filter on the elegant refrigerator mark and filter down to only the vendors that make that product, and then have all of the other vendors that don't make that product disappear because I'm not interested in them. And so this to me is just profoundly powerful because I've clicked on product and I filtered on vendor. And so now it's the relationships between product and vendor that are driving the analysis. No longer is it the case that I filter on product and all I can do is just deal with that one dimension. So let's take a look. How is this thing built? To kind of give you the context of how this thing is built, I'm just going to build like a little kind of starter workbook. We were looking at vendors and we were looking at products, and we have that product set on the color. And so currently in the product set is that front load washer. Those are the marks that are blue there. The front load washer marks are blue. And so what I want to be able to do is when somebody adds front load washer into that product set, I want to be able to highlight all of the records that belong to vendor B as being in the analysis because vendor B makes the front load washer, whereas vendor A doesn't make the front load washer, so I don't want vendor A to be there. And so in order to accomplish that, I'll just kind of show you how that's done by building a quick table calculation, it's not a table calculation. In fact, it's already here built for me. It's just a regular aggregate calculation. And so the way that this thing works is I'm just taking the members of the product set, which in the moment is that front load washer, and I'm just wrapping it in the maximum aggregation. And so the product set, while previously it would have been evaluated at a record level, record by record in the data source, now I've brought it up to the aggregate level, And this aggregate evaluation is going to happen at the level of detail of the dimensions that are in the view. And so what that means then is I can take that max of the product set and put it out here on the color, and it is really going to behave in the same way that the other thing did, except notice that it's got an ag around it. It's an aggregate calculation. And the reason it's doing the same thing that the record level calculation did is because the product dimension is in the view. But the moment that I remove the product dimension in the view, now that maximum aggregation is going to be at the vendor level. And because these sets are a Boolean data type, when I take the maximum of a true and a false, it's true. And so this one true combined with all of these falses for vendor B will make vendor B come out to be true. Whereas vendor A, which doesn't have any trues in it, the maximum of these two falses will be false. And so by just bringing that evaluation of whether they're in the product set up to the aggregate level and removing the product dimension from the view, now I have true for the vendors that make the product that is in the product set, and a false for the vendors that don't make that product. And so this then is how this particular worksheet is built. I simply have a vendor makes the selected product set, and this is a set that considers all of my vendors. It's built on the vendor dimension. It considers all of my vendors, and it simply evaluates the condition by the formula is the max of the selected product set. And so now what that means is that I can take that vendor makes the selected product set and place it onto the filter shelf, and then inside of this dashboard build a dashboard action that will update the members of the vendor set. And so when I click on one of these things, then it is going to filter out and remove all of the vendors that don't make that selected product. One of the other things that I wanted to point out with this particular use case is that in these actions, I also have a highlight the selected product action, which when I select a product is going to highlight all of the marks in the view that have that product. And that's the reason why when I select this mark here, all of these are highlighted. If it weren't for that highlight action, if that weren't there, then by default, Tableau is only going to highlight the marks of the pane that I've selected, and all of these other marks are not going to be visible. And so that's the reason why, for me, it's just really great that we can use these set actions in combination with other actions. And so in this case, I just want to highlight the product here in order to accomplish the thing that we're looking for. And in addition, I've used that membership of the product set on the size, so that the in and out of the set makes the marks of the product that I select get bigger. And so this then is very powerful, a way that we are selecting the mark for a product and filtering the rows by vendor and sizing and highlighting accordingly based on the user's selection. So the next of these examples is very similar. Again, we are filtering on relationships, but this time we're doing it in a different direction. In the earlier example, we selected a product and we filtered by vendor. And so vendor is at a higher level of detail than the product is, and so we were kind of going up in aggregation. And in this example, it's the same idea, but we're going down in aggregation. So here I've got a breakdown of my different failure modes, and I'm doing what in retail would be referred to as a market basket analysis. What I want to understand is at the time of checkout, which items were in the basket together, which items co-occurred. And in this kind of manufacturing, production, and service scenario, what that looks like is a co-occurrence of failure modes. When a product comes back for service, over time, if it comes back for service more than once, which failure modes tend to co-occur together in the same products? And so, like if I click on failure mode I here, or failure mode 8, I can see that there's a very high proportion of those products that come back from failure mode I that over time also come back with failure mode F. And so to unpack this guy, how does that work? It's very much the same idea, except since we're going down in granularity with that, what I'm going to do is just go through a different kind of approach to the thing. And so in this case, I've got a set on serial number, which is deeper than failure mode. And so when I edit that serial number set, again, I'm going to consider all of the serial numbers in the data source, and I'm going to use this condition, which simply evaluates if they're in the failure mode set, which is driven by the action, give me a 1 or a 0. And because this particular dialog for a set condition needs to be at the aggregate level, I just need to wrap that thing in a maximum so that this whole thing can be brought up to the aggregate level. So basically, I'm saying take the max of if they're in the failure mode set, give me 1, otherwise 0, and I want to make sure that that only equals a 1. And so this is a way that I can allow relational analysis to drive the interactions in the view by working with dimensions that are at a deeper level of granularity than the one that I'm working with. And so that then is the use case where I'm driving relationships going down in granularity, whereas this one is where I'm driving relationships going to a more summarized or going up in granularity or aggregation. Okay, and just kind of driving into the last little bit here, I want to squeeze in a few more use cases about how other things we can do. I can use these set actions to filter an axis. So in this case, I've got 2 sets on vendor, and this histogram on the left is driving the set action for vendor 1. And when I do that, it is filtering only this vertical axis. It's filtering only the vendor 1 axis, whereas this histogram down on the bottom, that set action is filtering this horizontal axis. It's filtering the axis for vendor 2. And so this then allows for me to compare the service rates from vendor 1 to vendor 2, or I can compare, say, vendor A to everybody, or vendor E to just vendors C and E, or vendor E to vendor A and B, etc. And so this is super powerful because I can use the set action to drive a calculation that filters just one axis in the view. Think about your slope charts and your other chart types about how you can leave one axis constant and filter just another axis with this thing. I want to point out that it's important if you're going to do this type of analysis that these 2 axes be identical in length for the sound validity of the visual analysis. So I've just got some reference lines in here that will stretch the axis to the maximum of the 2 marks that are in the window. And it's also important that this be a square, because otherwise, if we were to stretch it out, it would falsely emphasize one of the axes over the other. And so that's the reason why I've made this thing a square with equal range for both axes so that I get a truly apples-to-apples comparison. So obviously, when I compare vendor E to itself, that relationship is linear like that. Okay, great. So that then is another use case. Also, by filtering a term in an axis, I can take the difference from a calculation. So if I select 3 marks over here, or if I select just 1 or 2 marks over here, on this side, I can drive the difference from the selected average. So the marks that I'm selecting on this left-hand side are driving the membership of a set. And then over here on the right-hand side, I'm seeing how each individual row differs from the average of those that are in the selected set. So here, if I just choose this mark, then the selected average comes to this point, and each of these bars show me the difference from each vendor to vendor D, or the difference from each vendor to vendor E, or to the average of vendor E, which is itself, or if I select multiple of these things, what is the difference between my top 2 vendors to the bottom 3, etc. I can also use set actions to calculate reference bands. And so in this case, if I click on wall oven here, my reference bands are going to highlight the wall oven line along this chart and highlight the band between the minimum and the maximum for that product. And if I click the front load washer or by product, every time I click a product, the reference bands are going to shade in the area between the min and the max for that product that I've chosen. And again, I can combine that with filter actions to filter down just to one vendor at a time to enable this type of powerful visual analysis. And the last of these examples that I wanted to show is just grouping by other. So if I select a few things here, like if I select one mark, that mark is shown on the screen and everything else is just bucketed together into others. So if I select these bottom factories or say these top factories, I can look at my top 2 factories compared to everybody else. And now that we're running out of time, that then is the finish of my webinar. I really hope you've enjoyed spending this time with me. And again, my gratitude for everybody involved. And thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you, Keith. I think I speak for everyone when I say this was super informative. There were all sorts of comments coming into the chat saying how awesome they didn't know that they could do some of these things. So thank you so much for presenting. The good news is we're going to be sending out a recording of this, and so if something caught your eye, you can go back and rewatch it and apply these things. Unfortunately, I don't think we have time for questions, but there will be lots more content like this at TC19 this year, which will be in Las Vegas in November. So if you register now, you get a $200 off that full ticketed price. If you want to learn more, go to tableau.com/TC. Thank you again for joining us, and we hope to see you soon. Thanks. Bye.